Hey, welcome into the Grace Point Daily Podcast. My name is Jeremiah Johnson alongside Dr. R.B. Maynard. Going to be a verse-by-verse edition of the Grace Point Daily Podcast. Exists to bring you daily encouragement for your daily walk with Christ. This is where we just get in the Word. So Dr. R.B. Maynard, welcome once again.
Here we are again.
The summer is just rolling along. It's August, and before you know it, school time, fall time, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to fall. This weather is not not my favorite.
Well, I have a son that, we dialogue here just for digress for a minute, but I have a son, Isaiah, like last night, he's like, we went and had ice cream. He's like, I'm cold. Oh, and he's like shivering. I'm like, dude, you're going to have, like, I was like, do you have dreams at night of jungles, monkeys? You're going to have, God's going to have to take you someplace really warm because if you're like struggling with cold issues this time of year, I don't know what to tell you right now.
Yeah.
I give him a hard time about that. So anyway, I don't want to move necessarily back north, but west. I always say that's where I miss the West, Utah, that lack of humidity, that west, get west of the Rockies, and I do enjoy that kind of weather.
Oh,
so.
I know. If it wasn't, they always say it's not the heat, it's the humidity, but I believe that is true. I can walk out when it's 90 degrees, and it's like, oh, it feels nice today. But boy, this kind of weather is like you walk out doing nothing.
Yeah, and there's this, I'm, minister with the Assemblies of God. They always have their big conference every 2 years in Orlando, which they had last week, but we had our conference. And I wasn't necessarily, it's not that huge a deal for me to go necessarily, but August in Orlando is not ideal for me. I'm like, never get super excited about that anyway. So, All right. Well, where are we at in the Bible here, Dr. R.B. Maynard?
We are in 2 Kings 3:18 and 19.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. This is, again, in the middle of a conversation, but they're talking about this drought, and they're talking about they don't have water for their horses and all of that. So in verse 18 it says, "This is an easy thing." So the easy thing is, he said, you dig these ditches and they're going to become full of water. But it's like, well, that sounds pretty unbelievable. But what he says, this is an easy thing in the eyes of the Lord. He will also hand Moab over to you. You will overthrow every fortified city and every major town. You will cut down every good tree, stop up all the springs, and ruin every good field with stones. And the King James, sometimes you bounce back and forth, I like the wording, but it says, this is but a light thing. That's what the Lord is saying through Elisha here. This is a small thing, and we look at a lot of things like that. Somebody on the ventilator with COVID seems so big to us, so overwhelming, or any other terminal disease or a deformity that someone has or financial, whatever the thing is, it does seem so big to us. And a lot of times in my prayer, I've just used the thing that just takes a snap of the finger, for the Lord. So I love that. This is but a light thing. You're going to get the water, but then this is where it talks about sometimes not only do we get what we ask for, but the Lord just goes ahead and pours something else. Sometimes we forget that God really cares about us and wants to do good things. So we're like, sometimes our requests are like, well, Lord, I know I don't really deserve this, and I sure am. This is an awful big thing that I'm asking. If you could, the phrase, if you could just do this one thing for me, then, of course, some people are like, then I'll serve you, But some people are like, I won't ask you for anything else if you'll just do this one thing. And, that's not the way to pray.
Yeah.
Really. I'm sure I've done it, but that's not really the way to pray. It's big things and trusting the Lord for things that are impossible. If it was possible without the Lord, we wouldn't need to pray.
Exactly.
And that's why we pray. But he talks about you're not going to just win the battle, but it says you're going to overthrow every fortified city, every major town. You're going to cut down every tree. And this is, we'll come back to that, but stop up all the water wells, ruin the fields with rocks. So this is, not only is this going to happen, but all of these other things you're going to have success in. And this is one of those areas, for people there's people out there who like to nitpick the Bible and say, well, God said this, and now they're doing this. That famous phrase, the Bible contradicts itself. Well, for one thing, do you think God doesn't have a right to do what God wants to do? I mean, he may have said something, but we don't realize there's an exception to that. Now, sometimes it's absolute. I mean, the way of salvation, there's not really exceptions to that. But there are things, and back, we won't go read it, but back in Deuteronomy, it talks about these cutting down the trees. It says, do all this stuff, but don't cut down the trees. In other words, those could be used for something else, so you can do all this other destruction, but leave the trees alone. So we don't even reading commentary on this, and it doesn't really explain why this became an exception, but I think sometimes the Lord does things to say, yes, I said that, but if I'm allowing it over here, then there must be an exception. We don't have to understand it. God makes the rules. Do you think he doesn't have a right to change something or to allow an exception to that rule? But that's his exception, not ours. We don't get to decide, well, I don't know. Again, as Eve said, or the serpent said, did God really say? We want to change things to fit. And all this, it's like, this is total devastation of a city. I mean, you're going to destroy the city. And Moab was a descendant from Lot. He was a son of Lot, but he was the son of Lot and his oldest daughter. It was one of those incestual relationships. So Moab is kind of known for a lot of evil anyway. So you're looking at a city here that's not known to be a spiritual place anyway. And then, then when you look at those kind of things, it's not a very spiritual city. But then Ruth, who we know the story of Ruth, was a Moabite. So it doesn't always mean. I mean, we look at New York City, or we look at Hollywood, or and we just sometimes think that every person who lives there is horrible. They're all a bunch of liberals, and I would venture to say there's probably an Assembly of God church in Hollywood, who teaches. I don't know that, but I would think they would teach the doctrines of the Bible, and not water it down. So there's good people everywhere. There's good people that come from everywhere. With Jesus, they said, is anything good come out of Nazareth? Well, they were used to nothing good happening there. So anyway, 3:20, the next morning, about the time for offering the sacrifice, there it was, water flowing from the direction of Edom, and the land was filled with water. It doesn't say it rained. It just says that water starts flowing down. They've dug all these trenches, and they had to do something actively to see this happen. It wasn't like, okay, it's going to rain tonight, and your crops are going to be good, and you're going to have enough water to drink and enough water for your cattle. I mean, can you imagine? I like to picture, and Hollywood could do a good job of recreating so many of these things. Yeah. And back when the Noah movie came out, I don't know if you ever watched that. Yep. But I was so looking forward to that, because I thought, man, Hollywood's going to be able to really reproduce that flood.
That had the rock monsters and stuff like that? Yeah, okay.
I mean, it just, I thought, I was so disappointed.
Yeah, that was a bad one.
Yeah, because of what they could have done. And, I mean, I get it that with movies you take some liberty, but not just crazy stuff.
Yeah, I remember we almost rented a theater to show that for a church, and I saw it ahead of time. I was like, whoa, this is a good call on that one.
Yeah, that's for sure. But anyway, I'd like to see these things happen. They're standing here like, okay, we dug the trenches, and how many people would dig the trenches? That's the other. How many people in the church will take that step and then stand back and look at those trenches and be like, okay, I don't see anything, I mean, did they expect it was going to happen as soon as they took the last shovelful of dirt out? I mean, I don't know what these people were thinking, but I just, maybe that's part of heaven. Maybe we're going to get to watch a big movie that's going to show how it all actually, played out.
Now showing Dr. R.B. Maynard,
Yes.
The life of Dr. R.B. Maynard.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, they got canceled for lack of viewership. But
We're just going to stream that one.
Yeah.
A second ago.
yeah, okay. I'll be waiting for that. I know the audience out there that's going to make them want to die now, because that'll be anyway. We better move on.
Yeah.
3:21. Now all the Moabites had heard that the king had come to fight against them, so every man, young and old, who could bear arms was called up and stationed on the border. This is it's not every man, child, and every person, but everyone trained to use a sword. In other words, these are soldiers. Verse 22, 23, when they got up early in the morning, the sun was shining on the water, so the Moabites across the way, the water looked red like blood. That's blood, they said. Those kings must have fought and slaughtered each other. Now to plunder Moab. I mean, this is, again, by God's providence. I've seen reflections off of water before, but I've never seen it where I thought it looked like blood.
No.
In a reflection. It's pure blue, or it's clear, or
Dirt. Or like dirty. I mean, I've
Right.
seen dirty
right,
river water,
green, and
AKA Spring River, Oklahoma.
Right. But I've never seen anything red like blood.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So this is, again, God's causing an illusion, or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
But the question, why would you think the kings had fought against each other and killed each other, and this was all the blood in the water, and you can see this from a distance, and I mean, it really doesn't even make sense what they think. But so many times we say God doesn't use mind control, but he does cause things to cause confusion with soldiers, and he causes them to hear things that aren't there. He causes them to see things that aren't there. So it's not that God takes our minds and manipulates us and makes us serve him, but he can, in extreme circumstances, cause things to happen for our protection, for our guidance, whatever it may be. We say, well, I'm blaming that on God, but why would they have killed each other? It doesn't make any sense. And so I think God caused a confusion. Maybe they were a bunch of these kings, and they got into a big fight with each other. Not like preachers or church people would ever fight against each other, over any disagreements. But, and maybe it's, they might have thought, well, they're thirsty and their minds aren't right, and so they've killed each other. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, actually. But, and again, we're not going to go back and read it, but in 2 Chronicles 20:23, it does talk about a past experience where the kings it doesn't even tell us why. It just says they fought and killed each other. And so again, it's God causing confusion or whatever it may be that causes some of those things to happen. And then part of it, God does things sometimes because he wants people to know that he's involved, that this wasn't man, this wasn't just something that made sense, in other words. I mean, sometimes God did things, excuse me, or Jesus did things, and he said, don't tell anybody, or he went into a room and, healed somebody. I mean, it wasn't a public display, but there were times when God, especially through the Old Testament, I mean, he showed himself. He wanted people to know who he was, and that he was I hate to say a God of vengeance, but there is an angry God. I mean, we talk about the love of God and God's grace and God's mercy and all of those things, but we forget that God is not happy with a people that, choose not to serve him. Now, I don't believe we have a God who every day, I always think of the book of life where our name's written. I don't think there's an eraser.
Yeah.
Okay, you're in there. Oh, you messed up. Got to take your name out. Oh, you did good today. I'm going to put your name back in.
Yeah.
But we act like God is that God of anger It's just every time we do something wrong, we're going to heaven, then we're going to hell. Then we're going to heaven, then we're going to hell. And unfortunately, I was kind of raised with a little bit of that mentality. You know, I mean, I really, in my young years, just totally served God out of fear. I mean, I didn't, you know, as a young person, I really didn't have what I would call a relationship with the Lord. I just served God. I mean, I still like to come to church, and it wasn't like I was forced into it, but I really didn't have much relationship. I was raised in fear. Do this, or if you do that, you're going right to hell. You know, there's no questioning on it. So anyway, I mean, I think God maybe just needed to show himself and show not only to the enemy, but to the people he's fighting for, to show them that he's still in control. And I think, bringing it into today's world, I think the Lord, at some point, he's going to show us some things. I think we're going to see some things and that nobody's going to be able to deny. And again, maybe they will, because in today's world, you can cause an illusion. You know, we have magicians and we have Hollywood that can make things look a certain way. I don't know if God parted the Red Sea today, if anyone would believe it, other than the people that were right there. Yeah. Because that was a camera trick, you know. Didn't really happen like that. So, verse 24, but when the Moabites came to the camp of Israel, the Israelites rose up and fought them until they fled, and the Israelites invaded the land and slaughtered the Moabites. So, even the Israelites had a plan of how to defeat the Moabites, so they're just basically waiting there for the right time and the right commandment to go attack. And the enemy just shows up, you know, out of nowhere. It's like, you guys aren't even going to have to go out and fight. They're just going to come to you. And there's even a thought that they left their weapons because they thought the Israelites are all dead. So we're going to be able to plunder the camp and take, you know, their weapons and their food or whatever they might have. So there was probably an idea there, and they dropped their own weapons to come there because they thought they were already dead. Yeah. And then they rise up and start, killing all of them. But they had a plan. The Israelites had a plan to attack Moab, but God had a different plan. They just, God responded. They had a plan. God responded with a better plan. And that's where I'm always, when I pray about things, there have been times, and I've done this quite frequently, especially when the pandemic first started. Stella and I would just get out and just drive around, and we'd say, I'd say I built that house, or this and that happened there, and there was a car wreck here one time, or different things like that. Well, one of the things that I've said several times, and she's heard me repeat, I've driven by places and I said, I tried to buy that place, and I am so glad that I didn't get it. But what happened in all of those situations, I have never I worked as a paramedic, so yes, I always had that job. But once I got out of that and began to just build houses, I've never been without a job. I've never advertised. I don't have my name on the side of my truck.
You don't have a website.
I don't have a website. I don't have a business. People ask me for a business
You're not
card.
On the gram.
Yep. I don't have. I don't do any of that. But the Lord has always provided. So what I can say is, I am so glad that God didn't give me that property, because now I know things I didn't know then, in other words. Yeah. And I'm so glad he didn't give it to me, but he always gave me something else. So it wasn't like, well, Lord, you didn't give me that property, and then I sat around for 6 months with nothing to do. It was something else, or something better came along, something more profitable, or whatever you want to call it, came along. And so with God's plans, he can always stop a plan, and we might be disappointed, but he brings us something else, So, but anyway, the Moabites, obviously they were surprised. They thought these guys were all dead, and now they show up there. and these guys just jump up, attack them, and run them off. So it says, verse 25, they destroyed the towns, and each man threw a stone on every good field until it was covered. They stopped up all the springs and cut down every good tree. Only Kir Hareseth was left with its stones in place, but men armed with slings surrounded it and attacked it as well. So this is a complete destruction, and it's not like Canaan. We know the story of Canaan, that those guys did not do what God told them to do. They didn't drive out everyone, and He warned them. He said, if you don't drive them out, you will be tempted to become like them, and that's exactly what happened. Yeah. I mean, those people were, I'm not going to say they were faultless when they left Egypt, but they were a pretty good group of people. Yep. I mean, God was rescuing them, but they came in, and it didn't take long because they didn't destroy all the Canaanites. It didn't take long till they started doing what the Canaanites were doing. And so this is unlike that, because they completely destroy everything. And it says the men picked up stones from the field. The soldiers picked them up and threw them back. These are, I don't know, I know you've been to Mexico, but I remember one thing about Mexico was when we went, most of the time I was in Matamoros, which is right on the border. But one trip I made actually was the same place you were, in Chihuahua. Mm-hmm. And one thing I noticed out there was a lot of fields had stone fences, and they weren't like laid with mortar. They were just stacked. I mean, there were so many rocks in those fields that they had picked up the rocks and actually made fences out of those rocks. And so in this case, I could just imagine how much time was spent picking up rocks.
Yeah.
To clear their fields, to have crops, or be able to have their cattle, or whatever the case was. And now these soldiers, I mean, it just seems it seems so odd to me. Okay, guys, I want you to go pick up rocks and throw them out. That sounds like a childish prank. Like some farmer has been out there picking up rocks all day, and the neighborhood kids show up and start throwing all the rocks back, and the farmer comes out the next day, and there's all the rocks back in his yard. I've got one of my renters, and again, I'm not totally sure about his honesty, because I think he's a little bit delusional, but he has had several tires slashed in his front yard. He parks right in his front yard next to his front door, but neighborhood kids or somebody have slashed his tires, and he'll get them fixed, and they'll slash them again. Just meanness. I mean,
sounds like a nice neighborhood.
Yeah. I don't know. Again, I don't know if that happens, or like he's a little bit delusional too. But I can't imagine that scenario. Your captain, sergeant, or whatever. Okay, guys, start picking up rocks and throwing them out in the fields. So it's a matter of totally destroying. In other words, if they come back to these fields, if there's Moabites left, and they come back, we've destroyed, but we've made it extremely difficult for them to try to rebuild the city that they're in. It would, again, I try to think of how that compares, because I'm not a farmer, never been that, but I think about, knocking, if there, and there was, I guess, in the past, I don't know that much about it historically, but there was a Battle of Carthage.
Yeah.
Well, it'd be like today if we had a battle and they knocked down our courthouse. And, just as not because they really needed to, but just because the city of Carthage is so proud of their courthouse, and somebody came along and just knocked it down just to be mean, just because they could. And so that's what these guys are. And these are all at the command of the Lord. I mean, this is not just their mean way of doing things. This is what the Lord said to do. And it talks about that. It says, except for Kir Hareseth, that which was the capital of Moab. And they said there that the stones were more decorative, large stones that you couldn't just pick up and throw back in somebody's field. So it's not that they were being favored as much as it was just almost an impossibility. And the in the Hebrew, it talks about, in the translation of some of this wording, it talks about, you remember the old catapults that they used to have?
Yep.
That was part of this. It wasn't a matter of just soldiers out there, but that they were actually setting up catapults and launching these rocks back into, and I'm sure with a catapult, you could throw a larger rock back in somebody's field that they wouldn't be able to just pick up and get out of there too. So anyway, it's just all this, I mean, I don't know what it would be like in today's world, in these situations. But in that time, that was the way you fought. That was the way you destroyed a city. In other words, was to destroy the crops. That's all they had. So 26, when the king of Moab saw that the battle had gone against him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through to the king of Edom, but they failed. So, again, these were more than one king. That was, when they talk about the Israelites, there was more than one king there that was involved in this fighting. So they believe that Edom was the weakest of the three kings. So it's like, well, if we fight against him, we can win because he's weak. But it says in verse 27, then he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him as king, and offered him as a sacrifice on the city wall. The fury against Israel was great. They withdrew and returned to their own land. So this is Moab was known for idol worship. I mean, the Moabites, again, not every Moabite was evil, but they were known for being an evil place, kind of like Ahab being known to be the evil king. But these things just dumbfound me how people can sacrifice. I mean, I know we talk about abortion and that it's kind of like this because you're sacrificing children, and there's the argument that children don't feel anything in the womb, which I don't think any.
The argument they're not really a baby yet,
right?
Yeah,
right.
They're just a fetus or whatever.
They're not a person,
Their lovely terminology that they use.
Yep. And so, this is a little bit like the same thing, other than it is a child that has already been born. But this is the child that was going to succeed him as king, but he is so adamant that it will work to win the battle or keep the kingship or whatever he's got in mind, that he takes his own child, not even in secret. You can see some of these things where they would, we would hear this story, but it was like, hey, he took him out to the barn and sacrificed his child, or even Abraham and Isaac, or Isaac and Jacob, those stories of sacrifice. That was even done privately, really. I mean, go to the mountain and, build an altar and place your son on the altar, those kind of things. But but this is, child sacrifice. And the King James says to offer him as a burnt offering. Now, that is beyond me how, I love the Lord, and I love the church, and I'm planning on going to heaven. And, my life really, if people say, one time somebody said, what do you have for a hobby? And I stopped and thought, I don't have a hobby, but church is kind of like that, because I do that for enjoyment. Again, it's not because, like when I was younger, that I was doing it out of fear. I've said it before, I love to come to church. And so I can't imagine, as much as I love the Lord, I can't imagine taking my child, and this is not about loving the Lord even, but I can't imagine, whatever the cause is, taking my child and burning them.
Yep.
We sometimes struggle with, I know your daughters are getting ready to go to college, and I know you said Zoe's not going away yet, and it's like, that's kind of a good feeling for you. You're not losing your daughter yet. Well, I don't know. I think you really wanted them out of the house.
I did. Yeah, Rachel didn't, but I know.
Right. Yeah. Well, just when you thought you had some freedom, and But, there's a sacrifice. I can't imagine even, my boys live 10 hours away, so I can go on a weekend trip or, something and see them. But I can't imagine the feeling of turning your child loose to go to Africa or someplace where you may never see them again. And I can't imagine that kind of sacrifice. I surely can't imagine a sacrifice where you would kill your child for whatever the cause was, the cause of Christ even, which is the biggest thing in our life. Yeah. And I can't imagine God saying, I want you to kill your child. And I was, okay, God. I think I'd just be like, no. I'll do anything but that, And so, maybe he thought he was sacrificing to Israel's God because they believed in blood sacrifice and those kind of things. So we always say the devil doesn't do anything original. That's why we have the Antichrist that's going to be here. And what he does is mimic what God does. He doesn't come up with a new plan. It's, people are going to be resurrected from the dead, or people are going to be healed, while he's the Antichrist and things like that. But, and maybe the whole thing of hearing about Abraham and Isaac, Jeremiah 7:31 says, they have built the high places of Topheth in the valley of Ben Hinnom to burn their sons and daughters in the fire, something I did not command, nor did it enter my mind. This is the Lord speaking. I didn't tell, they wanted to do this in the name of the Lord, but the Lord's saying, I did not say to do this. This is not what I had in mind. Don't try to put this on me and make it something spiritual, because this is not God. And people have done it ever since. I thought of, yesterday I was looking at just some things. I don't know what came up that made me think of it, but I was looking up David Koresh and Jim Jones and those guys who had those cults, but they did it in the name of the Lord. It wasn't like, we're going to worship the devil and we want you all to, to do all these anti-God things. He was the prophet who, and I read one thing, and I don't know that this is a fact, but it said that that David Koresh had memorized the entire Bible. Now, I don't know if that's a fact. That was probably Wikipedia, But anyway, I think those guys are very knowledgeable in the Scripture, and you have to be able to lead people astray in the name of the Lord. And that's what happened with so many of these cases. So I don't know. Maybe he's sacrificing thinking that, hey, animal sacrifice works for the Christians, for the Jews. So, man, wouldn't God be more happy if wouldn't it take a greater sacrifice to sacrifice my child?
Yeah. Wow.
I just can't imagine what they thought. And this Valley of Hinnom is the garbage dump. So when it talks about the Valley of Hinnom, it's the garbage dump. It's translated hell. That's where they burnt everything. So burning children in the garbage dump too. It's just craziness. But anyway, we'll wrap it up there today. So.
All righty, there we are, ladies and gentlemen. We are in 2 Kings. What was that? Chapter
3.
Chapter 3. So that means we'll start afresh in a new chapter, 2 Kings chapter 4. Hope you're enjoying it. Hope you are staying in the Word. This is the time. This is the hour. This is the day, man. We need to be in the Word like never before. Thank you, Dr. R.B. Maynard, and thank you for listening. Like, share, subscribe. Grace Point Daily Podcast. We'll talk to you guys next time.